This is the phone I find myself looking forward to the most every year. This is Nubia's latest flagship, the Z70 Ultra. Now the reason I look forward to this the most is because in a sea of similar flagships, Nubia's always managed to do something different. Whether it's that 35mm lens or the uninterrupted display, the camera design, or even that boxy AF build that I'm not even a fan of, it's just that Nubia's flagships are quite unique and competitively priced at the same time. So in today's video, let's take a deep dive into what Nubia has done with the Z70 Ultra. If this is your first time here, or in case you just can't remember, my name's Ash, you're watching C4E Tech, and let's get started. So yet again, I picked up the Starry Night edition of a Nubia flagship. This is a 16:512, the base is 12:256. Now unlike last year, there is no holographic picture on the box or a Gaussian blurred styling for the logo. Anyways, let me rip the plastic off and slide the box out. Once I remove the lid, the first thing we see is the Z70 Ultra itself. There's a Van Gogh quote here this time too. Removing the plastic of the phone, it feels very familiar in hand and at first glance even looks quite similar to last year's flagship. But when you look closer though, there are differences. The camera array, that's changed, and the Z70 Ultra, while slightly taller and wider, it's slimmer than its predecessor. More importantly, it's a whole 18 grams lighter. And that's despite sporting a slightly larger panel and a higher capacity 6150 mAh battery. That said, this is still a heavy and boxy phone, so it's not particularly easy on the hands, but Nubia at this time, they've rounded off the edges a little, so it's a bit more comfortable to hold when compared to its predecessor. Now talking about the Z60 Ultra, here's something I had to say in that video. Now, just like with that Red Magic phone, there's a toggle to the side here too. Now by default, it launches and exits the camera app. Personally, if you ask me, on a camera focused phone, I would have preferred to see a two-stage shutter key like what Sony does on the Xperia phones. And that's exactly what Nubia has done. They've added a proper two-stage shutter key. If you ask me, this is way better than Apple's camera control or Oppo's quick button. It's very simple: long press to launch the camera, half press to focus, full press to take a picture, and when doing this, you can also use the volume keys for zoom. Neat, right? Now, if you wanted to, you can set the long press to do other things like say jump to the video mode, so there is a bit of room for customization. Anyways, amongst these three, which implementation do you think is the best? To me, it's definitely the two-stage shutter key. I've always been a fan of this on Sony phones. To me, it just improves the whole shooting experience, makes it feel like I'm using a serious camera. Anyways, let me know what you think, what your pick is in the comments below. Now, that toggle from the Z60 Ultra, that's also present here. It's just been moved to the left top corner, a placement not too dissimilar to Apple's old mute toggle. By default, this launches the camera app, but you can set it to do other things like launch game space, like on the Red Magic phones, or turn the flashlight on or off. You can have it enter voice recording and start recording immediately, or you could use it as just a mute or vibration toggle, or you can have it access satellite messaging. Now this feature, beat up, is limited to the Chinese Starry Night edition. It's not available on the others. There are also a couple of other options that I couldn't test since they only work when the interface is set to Chinese. The Z70 Ultra also gets an IP rating, IP68 and 69 this time. The fingerprint scanner though is still optical, but its placement is quite ergonomic and it was fast and accurate. Now I really like the design here. I like how different parts of it have different refractive effects. Kinda makes the whole back look like an oil painting. If that's not for you, Nubia also offers this phone in black as well as gold. The back for all models is frosted matte glass, so it's very resistant to fingerprints and smudges. By the way, the color matched metal sides, they also have a matte finish and are just as fingerprint resistant. Now we've already seen this toggle and the shutter key. The power button, it is textured and easy to identify via touch. Then there are the volume rockers here. Now up top, there's a secondary mic and an IR blaster if you want to control appliances around the house. To the bottom, here we have the SIM tray that can take dual nano SIMs, the primary speaker and microphone, along with a USB 3.2 Type-C port that can output video. Now the earpiece up top, it pulls double duty as a second speaker, so you do get stereo audio. But unlike the Red Magic 10 Pro, there's no headphone jack here. So basically you lose the headphone jack, the capacitive triggers, liquid metal for the SoC and the active cooling fan. but instead you gain an IP rating, that two-stage shutter key, and better optics. Talking about which, the primary here is Sony's IMX906 this time. This is a 1x1.55 inch sensor that's been paired with a f1.59 to f4 variable aperture lens. Now that's a solid range. You get 9 different f-stops to choose from. And usually with variable aperture lenses on phones, my pet peeve has been that phones usually end up defaulting to the narrowest aperture. Like the Honor Magic 7 Pro for example, with a f1.4 to f2 variable aperture lens, almost always it ended up shooting f2 under good light. That just kind of felt wasteful to me. I mean, let's be honest guys, most of the times when we are shooting on a phone, we're going to be shooting on auto, right? Now if your camera focused flagship has choices, a wider aperture, a narrower aperture, but by default it always ends up shooting narrower, that's not really useful, is it? But not here though. The Z70 Ultra almost always shoots f1.59, so you get that nice shallow depth of field on images you take. It's beautiful. And like other Nubia phones, this one too comes paired with an optically stabilized 35mm equivalent lens. So compared to traditional flagships which use 23 to 26mm equivalent lenses, this gives you a more punched in look. Personally, I really love it. Now thanks to the variable aperture, you can also get these kind of starburst shots which do look cool. And under low light, this camera, it continues to impress. Just look at that sky, see how beautifully it's captured. Also, highlight control is pretty good. Low light shots, they turned out very nice. It doesn't over brighten everything like some brands. So we do get natural looking low light shots with a lot of detail, controlled highlights and low noise levels. And as always, Nubia continues to include a whole host of shooting modes. There's just a lot of options to play around with. And then we get to the secondary camera, and here's where things get a little iffy. Because this time, Nubia's gone ahead and downgraded the ultra wide. Now on the Z60 Ultra, we got a excellent, exceptional actually, 18mm ultra wide with OIS. When was the last time you saw OIS on an ultra wide? That's what we had. This time we get a 50MP OV50D paired with an f2 ultra wide lens, and that's not stabilized. So yes, the field of view is wider, 122 degrees instead of 100, but it's not just the OIS, the overall quality is just not as good. And it's not only that, the entire interface is a little weird too. It still shows 18, 35 and 85mm as the lens options, just like on the Z60 Ultra, but the lens here is 13mm, meaning you gotta tap this 3 times to cycle through. It's a weird choice that we also see with the telephoto. That said, images are still fine. Again, just not as good as they were with the Z60 Ultra. This lens does have autofocus. It can focus as close as 2.5 centimeters to shoot macros such as this. Now the third sensor is the OV64B, 64 megapixels paired with a 70mm equivalent lens. This one has OIS and it is wider, f2.5 instead of f3.3 the last time. But on the Z60 Ultra, we got a 85mm equivalent lens. So this looks like a side grade at best. For what it's worth, the images were pretty good and this lens can focus on subjects just 15 centimeters away. So we can shoot telephoto macro like this. From a video perspective, the primary lets you shoot 8K 30, but there is no stabilization at this resolution. The footage is also pretty underexposed at times, so it's not really usable. Now the primary and telephoto both let you shoot 4K 120. Again, no stabilization, but the exposure is proper. All three let you shoot 4K 60, and the footage is pretty good. Now, though all three do let you shoot 4K 60, you can't switch between the lenses when you're shooting. You can do that at up to 4K 30 though. I don't know why Nubia has done this. Overall, the feel I get, at least with the video part of the software here, it just feels a little half-baked. Now for the selfie camera, we get a 16 megapixel shooter. This is Nubia's 7th generation under display camera, and it's improved a lot from the last time around. It's almost as good as a regular hole punch camera on a mid-range phone, but not quite there yet. Like, see this, see how the lights show up? That's what happens due to the underscreen nature of the hardware, but then Nubia's processing kind of irons everything out. It's still not great, but definitely a good step forward. There are times where you can't really immediately tell that this was shot with an under-display camera. That's it for video where Nubia is not able to process the results as much. It ends up average at best and at 1080-30 nonetheless. Now all that said, the under-display camera itself, it's almost invisible. I never noticed it unless I went looking for it, and even then, it was hard to find. As a result of that, what we get here is an uninterrupted 6.85-inch AMOLED panel, one that Nubia has co-developed with BOE. I mean, just look at this. Looks absolutely fantastic, right? A 95.3% screen-to-body ratio, an increased 1.5K resolution with a 431 pixels per inch pixel density. We get a refresh rate of 144 Hz, so everything's smooth. And Nubia claims a peak of 2000 nits, which is for HDR. In my testing, this panel output about 650 nits under manual mode and 1300 nits under auto, so it's pretty good for outdoor use. Let's return back to the box, and here there is a SIM tool, and this is interesting. We actually get two cases here. First, there's this smoky TPU case with a pattern. It lets the design shine through while also adding to the grip, much needed for this form factor. Then we have this hardshell case. It has the same design language as the back, but pixelated. It looks cool. Then there are some leaflets, a red USB Type-C to Type-C cable, followed by an 80-watt charger. Guys, call me greedy, but I couldn't help but feel a little disappointed here, because last year with the Z60 Ultra, we only got one case, yes, but we got two sets of Type-C cables in Starry Night blue, a Starry Night themed 80-watt charger, and a regular multi-device charger. I honestly feel that was the better collector's edition. Now, I am just complaining as an excited fan is all, because honestly, in a world where mainstream brands are constantly removing chargers, even from mid-range phones, this is still a good set of box contents. Using this 80-watt charger, you can get a 50% charge in just 15 minutes and a full charge in under 40. But do note, there is still no support for wireless charging. Now, before we delve into the internals, two things. One, from a look standpoint, how do you think this looks? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate this design? Let me know in the comments. And number two, a big shout out to video sponsor Anbernic. Anbernic now has a new handheld in the form of the RG406H. So basically a horizontal version of the very well received RG406V. You get the same 4-inch 4x3 720p IPS panel, the same excellent buttons, Hall sensor triggers and Hall sensor analog sticks with RGB, and the same processor which is capable of emulating up to PS2 games, but all that now in a horizontal form factor. So the 406H, it's a sensible and exciting retro handle, especially if you're looking at emulating more recent systems like the GameCube or the PS2. I've been loving playing with mine for the past couple of weeks. So if you are interested in retro handhelds, the 406H is something you should look into. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Check it out for more information. Now coming back, the Z60 Ultra is powered by the Snapdragon 8 Elite. And like I mentioned earlier, this phone lacks the liquid metal and the active cooling that we saw on the Red Magic, but yet Nubia has managed to get very stable results. When the SoC is pushed constantly for 20 minutes, it only lost less than 20% of its peak performance. Now if you're just looking at stability, this might look very similar to what we got with the Red Magic 10 Pro. But if you look closer, there are a couple of things worth noting. Look at that max loop score. It's actually lower than the Red Magic 10 Pro's lowest loop score. But that's not necessarily bad. Even Asus on the ROG Phone 9 Pro went for such conservative tuning. If you ask me, I'd say more brands should be this conservative with their tuning instead of pushing too hard and trying to hit the highest benchmarks and ending up with very bad stability, major dips. So the result by itself, this, I'd call it great. But there is another issue. The Z70 Ultra got hot. And I mean all caps, unable to hold in hand kind of hot. Just see this. Even the metal frame was well over 50 degrees. To be fair, outside of this stress testing, with regular use, I never had the Z70 Ultra run hot. But just keep in mind, if you're gonna really push this phone, you're better off getting an external cooling clip. With that said, the 8 Elite is overkill for most Android games, so even graphically demanding ones ran fine without the phone getting unusably hot. Now the flagship 8 Elite here, it's paired with 12 or 16 gigs of LPDDR5X RAM and 256, 512 gigs or up to a terabyte of UFS 4.0 storage. Regular day-to-day use, it's fine given the specs. This is Nebula AI OS built atop Android 15, and in China, it comes with some quirky features like disabling the entire desktop and just having a voice assistant on screen to handle everything. But globally, Nubia leaves things more or less stock, so the learning curve wouldn't be too steep. But remember, there is shoddy translation everywhere. Now, I wouldn't call that a big negative, more of a mild annoyance. Now, the Nubia Z70 Ultra starts at 4599 RMB in China, converted prices are on screen. Globally, it's a little more expensive, obviously, but not by much. $729 in the US, 649 quid in the UK, 749 euros in the EU, so still very sensibly priced. So that's everything Z70 Ultra. I honestly really like this phone. Now, does it have its flaws? Sure, but it's a very unique device and probably one of the most exciting ones I've covered in recent times. So what do you guys think about it? What do you think about the Z70 Ultra? Let me know in the comments below, and if you've made it this far, please drop this video a like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on my other coverage of phones like this. And thanks for watching. Ash out.